It's the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and this is our latest hearing into racism in cricket. We are joined in our first panel. We have two panels today. Our first panel consists of Rod Bransgrove, Chair of Hampshire County Cricket Club, Mike O'Farrell, Chair of Middlesex County Cricket Club, Lord Patel of Bradford, Chair Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and Gareth Williams, Chair Glamorgan County Cricket Club. So Rod, Mike, Lord Patel and Gareth, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we begin, we need to do some declarations of interest, and I'd like to make a short statement. First of all, declarations of interest. I will declare, first of all, that I have received hospitality from the ECB and Surrey County Cricket Club. I'm also Chair of Lords and Commons Cricket Club. Giles Watling.
Yes, I've received hospitality from the ECB.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
I've received hospitality from Glamorgan Cricket Club, which is located in my constituency.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Steve Bryan.
I have once upon a time received hospitality from Hampshire County Cricket Club as a Hampshire MP.
Thank you. Right. Just before we begin, I wish to make a statement. The Whip's office need not be worried about this statement. But it concerns Mr. Colin Graves. Mr. Graves, who was chair at Yorkshire during the much of the abuse that was suffered by Mr. Rafiq, was invited prior to that session. He refused to come before this committee, saying that he didn't have anything to add. Mr. Hutton at that committee claimed that the Graves Trust, which obviously Mr. Graves set up, was a roadblock to change at Yorkshire, and that it actually stopped him from making necessary changes to the board in order to, he believed, to tackle the ongoing issue of racism. Now, we would probably have left it at that. However, Mr. Graves decided to brief a very well-trained journalist, put it like that, at the Yorkshire Post, where he expressed his view that the Trust is only a passive participant of the board at Yorkshire, and that he did not know, frankly, why we were so concerned about its role. We asked him to come in, having the fact that he put his head above the parapet, to come before this committee. However, he is in Barbados, so he will not be joining us. However, we did receive a letter from Mr. Hutton, which further outlined some of the issues, and I wish to read out some of the extracts from this letter in relation to the Graves Trust and its role within the board at Yorkshire. It goes, first of all, Mr. Graves is a substantial figure within the club's history, responsible for many of the club's greatest advances and achievements, and without whom the club may have become insolvent. He was also CEO and chair at the time that many of the instances of racism were found to have happened at the club. He is, I believe, the donor to the Trust, which has lent the club approximately £15 million. Whilst the Trust has independent trustees and a full-time observer on the board reporting to them, what was happening on a weekly basis sometimes appeared to me as if Mr. Graves was influencing the Trust and sometimes spoke as if he was. Mr. Graves expressed concern on how the investigation had taken place. That's the one into Mr. Rafiq and his allegations, some of which I empathised with, but his views on Azim Rafiq, the findings of the report, and how the club should respond to these findings were very different from mine. Shortly after that meeting, I was contacted by the Trust's independent observer. He explained to me very clearly that I should not consider the Trust an ordinary secured creditor. He also told me, although it transpired to be incorrect, that the Trust could remove me if they didn't like what I was doing and that I should listen to what they say. The Trust summoned me to a meeting and specifically asked me to listen to Mr. Graves and others in the club whose views differed to those of non-executive members of the board, but were more closely aligned to those of Mr. Graves. I did speak to Mr. Graves, but our views on the culture of the club and the way forward remained very different. I formed the view that some of his opinions were very similar to those of the executive of the board and others in the club who later wrote to the board. You'll recall the letter being leaked to the press. It seems to be, from this letter, and there are allegations after all, it's one, he said, so to speak, that there seems to be substantial and ongoing interference by Mr. Graves in the governance of Yorkshire County Cricket Club. So we reissue our invitation to Mr. Graves to come before this committee in order to explain himself in terms of the aspect of the handling of the Mr. Rafiq's allegations, but more pertinently to right now, in terms of the session we have in front of us, to also explain the role of the Graves Trust then and going forwards. So we'd like him to appear. It may not seem like a Yorkshire-type statement, more an Americanism, but we really think that Mr Gray should put up or shut up in this instance. So, again, we call on him to come before us. After that, Lord Patel, thank you very much for joining us.
Morning.
Morning. So, what's your view? The Graves Trust a passive instrument, yes or no?
Since I started, I wouldn't say there were a roadblock in anything that I had to do with them. I met with the trustees, had very frank, open discussions. They operated very professionally. They were very supportive of everything I was doing. And they certainly weren't a roadblock in terms of me asking anybody to leave the club or my wish to appoint anybody to the board at all. However, you know, I've read all the statements. I understand where people are coming from. I think when you have a financial agreement that has those added extras, i.e. you can have an observer on the board, though my understanding is the observer just observed and didn't interfere, that you could veto, in theory, the appointment or exit of a person.
The veto power, so it's not just observation power, the veto power.
They have a veto power, which, again, wasn't used while I was there, and I don't believe it was used before that, from what I've seen. So we've been in discussions, and we are currently drafting up legal documents to make sure all those powers are removed, and they'll be presented to the AGM, and they will continue.
So will the observation power still be there? Will they still be able to sit and observe?
No, they will operate like any other financial institution. We would expect them to conduct their fiduciary duties, you know, i.e. quarterly financial updates, just like the bank would, or any other loan lender. And you know, the trustee has been phenomenally supportive in that. Very, very professional.
Is that partly because maybe they had no other choice at that juncture, that the situation had run so out of control, you'd lost international cricket, you were facing bankruptcy, all your sponsors had left. So, frankly, it would be time, you'd be very foolish to have put roadblocks up, and you probably would have walked, wouldn't you, if the trust had not backed you?
I'd have wanted some hard evidence why I couldn't do what I wanted to do with all the issues before me, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think I'd have walked, but I'd have put some real serious challenges in the way as chair.
It's fair to say that there was no option. So it's a very entirely different set of circumstances to the ones that Mr. Hutton faced when he was in your position.
It's difficult for me to say because I wasn't there then, clearly, but you know, I've seen some correspondence where I believe the trusts were raising questions, you know, in a proper manner linked to the finances of the club. That's, you know...
you recognise the fact of soft power as well, the fact that they're there, they've got the money and they're in the room, they're observing, and they have that veto power. There's quite a lot of soft power, isn't it?
That's there, and I think that's why it was so important that we... And from the day I started, I said, look, we'll work this through, and we did. We worked it through, and the lawyers are drafting papers as we speak. That will not exist in the coming weeks.
It must be, it's the fact, though, that if you have recognised by taking the actions that you did, there was an issue there, you therefore recognise, ergo, there was an issue. So what was that issue? What concerns did you have that made you take the action to effectively remove some of the powers from the Graves Trust?
Well, I think it was a joint decision to remove those powers. The trustees were fully on board. To some extent, they had no wish to have those powers. They must have been set up historically when they were. There is a very clear perception, you know, and Chair, you've said it very clearly, that Colin has the ability to interfere in the club. You know, nobody doubts the massive contribution he's made to Yorkshire. Nobody doubts the massive contribution he made to the England and Wales Cricket Board. You know, however, you know, to have that potential, you know, or perception that somebody does have power in a place is not helpful for anybody to go forward. You know, personally, I would have liked to have looked at refinancing a number of our debts and consolidating them. Obviously, lenders are not queuing up at the moment to let me do that.
Okay. Can you say for certain that Yorkshire is a changed club?
From the 9 weeks ago that I walked in, it fundamentally feels different. You know, the day I went in on day one, I didn't feel quite comfortable. Last week, we had near on 380 members where we had a forum to discuss issues. A tough 2 hours, but I think we travelled a long way, and this is just with the members. I'll come back to the club itself, I think, because the members are crucially important. For such a large turnout on a Saturday morning, I think on Monday morning we had 100 new memberships sign up from that membership. I had emails from people, getting on in age, saying we need to change. We think the things you're doing, we did have a go at you, but I think they're on the right path. I think that felt a real change. Walking through the corridors every day when I walk through the door, I enjoy going to work. I enjoy seeing people. I enjoy talking to them. That wasn't the case on day one. So I think fundamentally we are changing. But, you know, there's a long way to go. I think the foundations are in place. I think the scaffolding's up, but to build a skyscraper is going to take some time. But I'm very optimistic.
You drew some criticism for clearing out the entire backroom staff. What was your reasoning?
Obviously, I can't go into detail in terms of individual, ongoing employment issues, but it was very clear, and this decision wasn't taken lightly. I'm a social worker by profession. It's really hard to, on a human level, to let people go for things that happened. There was no doubt that we needed to have a fresh leadership in the organisation. People had been allowed to do things. There was a culture where you couldn't challenge, you couldn't speak, or you felt you couldn't. I can't prove it wasn't, but it feels now that members of staff come to me every day and say, are you sure this is the right thing to do? Can we tell you another way? I don't think they had that ability in the past. I mean, you just have to look at, as an example, look at the coaching. We had to employ 6 new coaches, and people said, who's going to come to Yorkshire? You just got rid of the last lot and we can't do anything. We had over 90 applications from across the world. 90. Some of the biggest names in cricket. I purposely didn't get involved in the interview panel. We took on board the ECB's new criteria, completely blind applications. We scored each one, and it was, Darren Goff was shouting at me all weekend. Took him 2 days. We scored every single person. 5 individuals did it, blind, and the best person came out. Otis Gibson, one of the best coaches in the world. He won on the scores and he won at the interview. Now, it happens to be black, but suddenly we've gone from people being in the club a long, long time, who were reasonable, to one of the best coaches in the world being head coach. Something is happening that's right. And that process is echoed in our advertisement.
You recognise, though, by removing the entire backroom staff, you may have got rid of people who frankly had little or no involvement in any of the allegations that we've heard, and in fact now potentially could end up with their careers being blighted because of the associations that have been drawn from the fact they have been exited from your organisation.
I think everybody at the club feels their careers are blighted, to be honest. And that's the saddest part of this, going in every day, seeing young men and women who are working their socks off, but are terrified that come February they may not have a job. And this has been, it was sad to hear a young man say, I got a job in here serving tea, and that was the best day of my life. I got this badge, the Yorkshire badge. He says, I have to hide it now when I leave here. I've had members of staff who have been told to take in the street to take their Yorkshire shirts off because they're racist. I think everybody there has potential. So I think, the fact that we've come so far in such a short space of time does bode well in terms of we're moving forward, we're looking at the positives. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to produce the best county cricket club in the world, and we're big enough to do it. We're bigger than Australia and New Zealand put together. We're huge. you know, and the reach from rural to urban to diversity. I'm, you know, my inbox is full of people saying we want to help. If you're going to do the right thing, and you appear to be doing, we're there to help. You know, you just have to look at the data. You know, I was part of the ECB many years ago when we did the South Asian Action Plan. We knew then nationally 35% of all recreational players were from an Asian background, but then you got to 1 or 2 at test level. There's no difference at Yorkshire. If you dig into the figures, you know, more so because, you know, in Yorkshire, if you take Bradford and Kirklees, we're probably, you know, I'm waiting for the new census figures, but well over 50%. So we've got a huge talent pathway, and they're there at 10, and they're disappearing along the way. Why? So, you know, we're looking at all the data, we're examining where the pathways are falling, and we've got a number of activities to begin to change that. But, you know, we need support. We need support from the community, from corporates, of course from the ECB, which we're getting in terms of their, you know, action plan that we're localising. And have
Do you think you've done enough to get international cricket back?
I mean, I'm physically exhausted, but I'm really energised because I genuinely think this was, you know, putting this, you know, huge encyclopedia of information together wasn't just about getting international cricket back. Of course, it's crucially important because without it, we're financially not viable. But it was about doing the right thing, and you know, because of Azim, because of his bravery, somebody like me has the opportunity to do something that just comes around once in a lifetime, to change a whole county, the sport of cricket and wider sport. And you know, we're that big, we can deliver in partnership with others the whole of this, because it's almost a blank sheet, and people are sort of realising every day, oh, I didn't think about that, and you can see that learning happening.
How do you get international cricket back?
The ECB, rightly so, as a governing body, has set us a very tough criteria, a 10-point action plan, in terms of, you know, for me it was, you know, are we discriminating? Are we not? You know, what's happening? So I set up the whistleblowing helpline within a week. I started full independent governance review, which delivers tomorrow. You know, changing our board, changing our leadership, changing our culture, listening to people, engaging, making sure we deliver what we should as a first-class venue. So the whole myriad of specific criteria we've been set, and we've, for the last 9 weeks, done nothing else but meet those criteria. And it's not been me just sat in a room. It's been every member of staff that's there. They've been involved in it. It's about challenging and saying, how did that work? And of course, people are going to be defensive and say, well, you know, we do this really well, so why did this happen? We do that well, so why did that happen? And, you know, I'm targeting, you know, specific communities as well. So, you know, I'd love to tackle, you know, the whole 9 protected characteristics. We've gone for 4 at the moment. I think women and girls is crucially important. You know, South Asian communities make up the largest, you know, population there. Disability, and those who are less well off with income. That covers that broad spectrum, and I think that's what we need to do.
Those sound, I mean, they sound quite very broad and long-term objectives, but you need international cricket back right now.
Yeah.
So when will you have it back? Do you think? When are you going to get it back?
There's 2 points, sorry, Chair. We've made immediate priorities, and we're making immediate actions now. So we have a series of short-term actions from now to 3 months, which we've surpassed completely, 6 to 9 months and longer term. We will submit all our evidence by the end of this month, and then we will present to the ECB on the 1st of February, and then we will await a decision by them to see if we've met the criteria.
Okay, that's good. We'll establish that's brilliant. Thank you. Kevin Brennan?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Can I ask you, first, Mr. Williams, representing Glamorgan Cricket Club, which is, you know, obviously located, actually, Sophia Gardens, your headquarters is located literally a stone's throw away from the most diverse community in Wales, in South Riverside and Grangetown, just down the road. As you know, I contacted the club last year to talk about some of these issues, and Hugh Morris, the Chief Executive, was very, very helpful, and we weren't able ultimately to do a meeting that we were hoping to do, but you know, that can still happen. But can you tell the committee what Glamorgan has been doing about this issue of diversity at the top level of the game and down through the age ranges and so on?
It may be helpful if I begin by explaining the constitutional structure, because of course it's different in Wales, because sport is a devolved matter in Wales. So that Glamorgan is a first-class professional club which has a governing body of the ECB. Within Wales, though, the governing body for recreational cricket is Cricket Wales, which is funded in part by the ECB and in part by Sport Wales. So much of the work below us at Glamorgan is done by Cricket Wales, but we have a very strong relationship with them. Can I deal with one issue? If I may say, obviously I understand that you're looking at it from the perspective of a Cardiff Member of Parliament. Glamorgan is in a unique position because we don't simply represent the interests of the old county of Glamorgan. We're effectively a club which also represents Wales. And the ethnic diversity balance is slightly different in that context, because in Wales, the last count, I think 5.2% of the population was ethnically diverse. In Cardiff, I think it's nearer 20%. The position at the club itself is that currently 10% or thereabouts of the playing squad are from an ethnically diverse background.
How many players from Wales, from an ethnically diverse background, or from a South Asian background, or have played first-class cricket for Glamorgan in the last century?
In the last century, well, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I'm very happy to provide it to you. But I can tell you.
Would I be wrong to say it was one? That or are there more than that?
Glamorgan.
At the first-class county level.
We have two who are in our squad currently.
Okay.
One is Kieran Carlson, who is the vice captain of the entire team.
Right.
He's also, at 23 years old, was the captain of Glamorgan when we won last year the Royal London Cup, and he's one of our potential stars. He has a huge presence, even though he's only 23, in the dressing room. We have Prem Sisoya, who's another, I think, Cardiff man.
Yes,
so we have two out of our squad of 22, I think, is our squad. Excluding international players, we have.
I mean, it's been put to me that excluding international players, that those might be the only players from ethnic minorities from Wales who have ever played at the top level for Glamorgan County Cricket Club.
I doubt that would be right.
Okay.
But I'm perfectly happy to. But I mean, what I'm concerned about, bearing in mind I've been chair for just 3 years, is the current position. And I think that we are on the right path with two of our players out of a squad of 20, and obviously our aspiration is to make that a higher number.
When I contacted the club last year about this, before we had our inquiry on the committee, Hugh Morris, the chief executive, did tell me about the work that was already underway at Glamorgan County Cricket Club. Can you just outline what that is?
Yeah, I think you also had an opportunity to speak at one stage to Mark Frost.
Yes, that's correct.
And Mark is a communities officer who's employed jointly by Glamorgan and also by Cricket Wales. I think it's literally 50% of each. And so he's doing a huge amount of work within the community and also for Glamorgan. Our aspiration is to increase the number of players who are playing at first-class level, obviously. The big issues for us are scouting, and coaching and resources. And so far as coaching is concerned, we have currently 5 full-time coaches, none of whom is from an ethnically diverse background. We have, and it floats somewhere between 10 and 15 part-time coaches. And I am pleased to say that of the 10 to 15 part-time coaches, currently 4 of those are from an ethnically diverse background. We're about to recruit a 5th. And our intention is that we may well have a 6th on board within the course of the next few months. So at our level, where coaching and playing is critical to us, we are, I think, making significant progress.
Do you think there has been a problem, historically, that players from ethnic minority backgrounds from Wales are not coming through to the top level? Because you only have to look around the playing fields of Cardiff to see how many, cricket-mad South Asian people there are.
I'm afraid I performed as a cricketer at a very low level, but I was performing in the Cardiff Midweek League, which still exists, and in my day, which had been the 1980s, the Midweek League was dominated by British Asian players, and it still is. I forget how many teams there are in the league now. There's, say 25 teams, I suspect at least 80% of them. So you're quite right, historically there has been a big issue, but what I would not wish to give, this is a project for us. It's been ongoing. Mark Frost has been with us in particular for 8 years. He's done a huge amount of work, and I really would welcome the opportunity to invite you to Cardiff to speak to him. I think you would be hugely impressed by the efforts which he, Cricket Wales and Glamorgan have made. It is a priority for us. We know that historically there have been significant issues. We're working extraordinarily hard, and I would not wish to leave those volunteers who are working at this to be hugely dispirited by perhaps getting a wrong impression of a club which is trying its very best.
What's your analysis of why, up until now, and I take on board the steps that you are taking, initiated before this inquiry that we held, but what's your analysis of why it is the case that up until now players have not come through at the top level when there is such enthusiasm, so many players, as you've rightly said, playing the game recreationally?
Well, I have absolutely no doubt that historically there have been issues of racism in the sport generally, and no doubt in Glamorgan in particular. That must be the case because the figures simply demonstrate that to be the case. I'm satisfied it's not the position now. As I said, Mark Frost has been in place for about 8 years. It is like turning a ship slowly. Glamorgan itself, as you may well be aware, suffered from huge financial crises for a long period of time, thanks actually to the work of the acting chairman of the ECB, who was my immediate predecessor of chair of Glamorgan. We have put ourselves in a position where we are now financially sound, and that's been a trigger for us to be able to make an investment into the diversity programme, which is so critical. So yes, of course we've been slow having our foot on the accelerator, but I would not wish you to think otherwise, that it's not a critical priority. And this may be an opportunity for me to mention, lest I don't get the opportunity elsewhere, that so far as our board is concerned, there are 11 directors, 6 of whom are independent directors, 3 of them are female, 2 of the directors are from the British Asian community. They're terrific directors. They make a huge contribution, and they are helping to drive our response to the EDI issue generally.
And is that a fairly recent
well, I've been on the board for just over 3.5 years, and they were there when I got there.
Right.
And I'm not sure how long before, but I suspect probably 3 to 6 months before at most.
It has been put to me by some people within the cricket world in Wales that age, children from South Asian backgrounds who show talent don't always get treated the same way as kids from perhaps better off backgrounds, from who have more opportunities in life, should we say? What would you say to that accusation within Welsh cricket?
Whether that's true or not, I can't honestly comment. What I can say is that there is a resource issue here with which we're grappling at the lower level. As I say, Cricket Wales is primarily responsible for trying to develop ethnically diverse.
Do you think they're doing a good job?
I think they're doing a terrific job, given the resources which they've got. But there are big issues, for example, at academy level and below, in attracting young people from an ethnically diverse background.
It's been put to me that they have too many people on their books who are salaried staff, rather than investing that money into supporting young players from disadvantaged backgrounds into getting the kind of coaching and development that they need. Is that a fair accusation?
I'm bound to say from my discussions with Cricket Wales prior to this meeting that would not be a fair representation. And all I would say is, since that plainly is not necessarily within my level of expertise, it is an invitation I extend you to talk to Chris, to the chair of Cricket Wales and to the chief executive, both of whom are formidable ladies and are absolutely committed to work in this area. They can tell you a lot more, together with Mark Frost, about what's going on. I think that's a criticism I suspect they would say is wholly unjustified.
Okay. Can I just ask a couple of questions, Chair, with your indulgence, of Mr. Bransgrove from Hampshire? Do you think that you've been chair for a long time, I think, at Hampshire for over 20 years. Do you think during that period of time the governance of the club has lacked diversity?
No, in fact, quite the reverse. I mean, when I first came into Hampshire, I joined Hampshire with my long-term business partner, Feroz Jan Mohammed, who happens to be from a Kenyan Asian background. And one of the first things that we identified was that we had little connection with the Asian communities in Southampton, which represents a large part of the Asian communities in our catchment area. Together with Channel 4 Television, we participated in a programme where we opened a city cricket club at what's now known as Hoglands Park, which is actually immediately adjacent to the Antelope Inn, where Hampshire cricket was first founded in 1863. And this city cricket club was primarily for the purposes of encouraging cricket amongst the Asian communities, which indeed for a while it certainly did. It wasn't sustained, and that's been our concern, that we couldn't sustain the club. It didn't self-govern very well, and perhaps we could have done more to intercept that, but that didn't really work.
Do you have any members from ethnic minorities on your board?
Yes, well, of course, Jan is on the board. He's been on every board that I've had for 30-odd years, and we've recently been joined by a lady called Jenny Douglas-Todd, who is well known. She's EDI director for the National Health Service, has an enormous experience of EDI. Although my brief to the directors is generally speaking that we are all EDI directors, and giving somebody a specific responsibility for that doesn't dilute the responsibility of us all to ensure that that we have a diverse and inclusive attitude towards the structure of our game.
What do you think the reason is why, the striking thing that's come out of the sessions that we've had on this is that disconnect between the number of young South Asian players that there are out there with a great enthusiasm for the game and the startling decline in representation at the elite level of players from diverse backgrounds. What's your explanation for that as someone who's been involved in the governance of cricket for a long period of time, over that period of decline?
It is a matter of grave concern, actually, that we do lose so many players, and very often in the immigrant communities. And a part of the reason for this is because many of those families live in the less wealthy areas. They live in the deprived areas. We've identified an area in Southampton known as the Flowers Estate, and we've actually recently introduced a state school academy which uses our professional coaches, contact with the professional game, to try and encourage young people to take up cricket, which means providing space, resource, and most importantly of all, kit. Kit is a big barrier to participation in the game for less wealthy families. And I'm sorry to say that in many cases that does include those from Asian backgrounds and even the Afro-Caribbean people in those areas. We are addressing it. It is something that we want to put right. We have had players that have come right through our academy system to the first team, but very often, of course, these are people that have been educated at private schools. So our reach out has been much more directed towards the deprived areas and then collecting those that come from diverse backgrounds in the process of that. And the very successful experiment that we're conducting in Southampton, we have great plans to repeat shortly in Portsmouth, which has quite a high deprived community, and other inner cities.
The issue is that obviously, you're talking a good game there in terms of, what should be done. Can I just put something to you, and feel free to deny it? It's been put to me that at the chairs meeting at the Oval that took place on the 19th of November, that you were heard to say to some of your colleagues, the trouble is that they've forgotten the value of white men, and that you, in response to the Azim Rafiq Racism Revelations, said, I know what racism is like. I'm a white man over 60. Are those comments you remember making, or are they accurate?
Absolutely not.
So you would deny that?
Absolute
okay.
nonsense.
Well, I'd give you the chance to put that on the record.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning all. You've talked a little bit, a couple of you, about what you were doing before the EDI strategy was announced, but perhaps, Mike, you could say what your club was doing before the EDI strategy on diversity within your club.
Yes, of course, thank you for the opportunity. Three things, and I think it's important to remember that all the counties have been very heavily engaged in this, directly or indirectly. In Middlesex, we set up a separate plan, and so I should go back a little and say that in the 80s and 90s, about half our side were made up of culturally diverse people from the Caribbean background. So this is not a new situation. 2019, we set up a diversity and inclusion plan, which was aimed at working with the clubs in the area. There's 130 clubs that Middlesex cover, all of which are run by volunteers. So what we did was to start working with them to try and encourage, and I would say that about 60% of the players in those clubs are also from culturally diverse backgrounds. So we're working quite hard with them to do that. We have had for some time, it's now talked about as a whistleblowing campaign, but actually we have very free access for members. All of us in the board particularly have emails where members come, and the Middlesex members, as distinct, I must make the point, the Middlesex and the MCC are separate. We are partners, but Middlesex members are not necessarily MCC members, and therefore we encourage them to contact us directly. So there's been a lot of opportunity for them to do that, and they have done that. Where that happens, we go and see the individuals concerned, and I do a lot of that. Where it comes to the parents, and there's been an issue about diversity in parents with clubs and schools, we've gone out there as well, and all this has been going on for some years. So what the announcements in November came out, and I thought that Rafiq's evidence was compelling and very powerful, hasn't had a dramatic impact on us in the number of people that have come to us. We've had 4 extra people come to us as a result of what is now called whistleblowing. And so, and bearing in mind that within the Middlesex catchment area, in some, as I said, in some clubs, it could be 80% are culturally diverse. We've been able to keep the doors open and make sure that they have access to us. The other things we are doing, we're now setting up separate coaching programs. We've been lucky enough that...
So it's a direct result of this?
No, this is beforehand. This is beforehand. Okay. And one of the things that's been very good for us over the years is that people have come to us and said, can we work with you and young people? So a livery and we have many, 40% of people in London are below the poverty line. So what we've done there is we've encouraged people to come and join us, and where they haven't been financially secure, we've encouraged, with the help of a livery company in particular, to offer scholarships or bursaries, so that means that they can come and take part in coaching and they don't have to pay anything. In addition to that, we've been lucky enough to have a couple of people come to us and say, if you're going to give us focus to allow us to support young people who are less well off, we'll offer help there. So there's quite a diverse range of activities that we've been doing. We have a women's section as well, and we have a separate centre for women's cricket, and we have a separate centre for youth cricket. So although this is an accelerated process, this has been in train for some years, and I think lots of other counties have as well. I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but...
No, it's very informative. So do you think this strategy coming out will make any difference to what you're doing? Has it added anything to what you're doing, or are you carrying on with what you were doing before? Okay. And then I will come to the other gentleman to ask the same
3 things,
question.
if I might. One is it enhances what we're doing, bless you, because it's necessary to do that. Secondly, and this is quite important, people have come out and said, can we help you, exactly as Lord Patel has said. And we've had 1 or 2 people who have quite financially involved in the business world who've said, would it help if we gave you some money which would be focused on bringing those people who cannot afford the game to join it? So that's the second part. And the third part is we've taken, as a result of this, we've now made sure that we've got some extra help. So if there are any people who have any specific issues, we'll get someone to go and see them as well as us. I would like to say that we've also had some issues which have resulted in us having to refer letters to the police where we have been challenged on racist matters. and those are in the hands of the police, and I have the police numbers if you would need that, and that have been addressed. So we are moving and reacting and responding in as clear and positive a way as we can.
Bransgrove, what impact has had the EDI publication had on what your club are doing? You've said a little about what you were doing before, but has this had an impact on your club, and what are you doing differently? And particularly, what are you doing differently to boost women's cricket?
Well, again, you see, I mean, I think we are pioneering women's cricket at Hampshire. We have we run the regional franchise, the Vipers, which runs brilliantly. We're generating larger crowds to come and watch standalone Vipers games. We'll be increasing the number of the squad this year. We take the team out on road shows to schools and other places to develop and encourage participation in ladies cricket. And I actually, to be quite honest with you, I felt as though we were already up to speed in that area. And all that the report has done is it's made us revisit all of those individual aspects and say, look, how are we doing here? Is there anything we can do better that we're not doing?
Have you identified anything you can do better?
Yes, and that's why I think we've decided to expand this program of the state school academies, to try and reach more underprivileged groups. That's I think, I don't know whether we would have done it or not, but that's one thing that's come out of us considering, how we can improve in terms of our reach. The other thing is obviously expanding the role of Jenny Douglas-Todd to ensure that, she has a good oversight of EDI across our entire group, because it's more than just Hampshire cricket in our case. And we've done... We spent a long time. We're only a 22-year-old company, so we have a slightly shorter history in some respects than many other of the county cricket clubs. And we've sort of reflected on all of the overseas players. We've had all of the Asian players we've had through. We've tried to second guess whether we've made any mistakes along the way. We had intended approaching everybody and asking them, but we wanted to find out first what the structure and processes would be like with the national whistleblower system, because we didn't really see any benefit in instigating our own system if we had a national one that was working. But we feel comfortable that we're not vulnerable in any way, although we've looked at all of our documentation processes to make sure that we record things accurately in case of any challenge in the future. But I believe passionately, actually, that we were very much on this pathway, and that what the report has done has accelerated, if you like, our attention to it.
Williams, same question.
So far as women and girls...
EDI as well?
Yes, I'll answer to that if I may. So far as women and girls cricket is concerned, I know that Cricket Wales have got 3 full-time women and girls officers who literally go around Wales beating the drums of cricket. I know too there's been absolutely exponential growth in women's participation in cricket in Wales. Some spectacular figures. It's something like about 600 or 700% increase. And I think that is in no small measure due to the efforts of Cricket Wales, who I've just mentioned, and latterly, I think, to whether it is popular or not amongst everybody in the cricket world, to the 100, which has unquestionably attracted women and girls to cricket who would otherwise not have been interested in it. So far as EDI is concerned, of course, this issue has been a driver from our point of view. But at Glamorgan, we've had EDI as a board agenda for a very considerable time. We've got one of our British Asian directors who is driving it for us. In July last year, we applied for accreditation. This is before this story probably hit the press. We'd applied for accreditation in Investors in Diversity, and I think we're probably maybe the only sporting organisation which has done so. Certainly, so far as we're aware, the only first-class county. And our expectation is that if we are successful, we should know probably by early autumn if that's the case. And that organisation does a root and branch analysis of the whole culture of the cricket club. And I'm reasonably optimistic that accreditation will come, but clearly we've got many
So
hoops to
has
jump
the
through.
publication of the report itself made any difference to what you were doing? Are you doing anything different
Well,
to before?
it's expedited the joint plan that we've been working on with Cricket Wales as to EDI, and obviously that will come back. That is actually coming back to our respective boards. In our case, next week, in a couple of weeks' time, and we will obviously look to implement that plan. But a lot of the work is just going on anyway, but it's just encouraged us to put a foot on the accelerator that much more.
And then it's a question for everybody. The EDI strategy came out very quickly after our session with the Zim Rafiq, very quickly. And I'm interested to know what consultation, how the ECB involved all of you in coming out with that. So if we go along the line, we'll start at that end. It's easy.
Well, I mean, in fairness to the ECB, they were incredibly engaged in this process following this committee's intervention, and
How did they actually involve you as in your organisation?
Well, they pulled all of the county chairs together, and indeed all of the stakeholders of the entire game into one afternoon session. There was a great deal of debate because, of course, there's still many of us who feel that the game is not institutionally racist, but there clearly are pockets which have emerged. And I was one of those that was concerned that we might all be tarred with the same brush. But the one thing that everybody agreed with at that.
But you must agree that there was certainly some institutional racism in cricket in this country.
Well, that's what emerged from the committee meeting, and obviously we had suspicions about what was happening at Yorkshire, and there were other isolated cases. But I hadn't seen the game as being institutionally racist on the ground. It never appeared that way to me. And I've been in the game for 22 years, but I've been following it for decades. And Hampshire had a long history of overseas professionals from the West Indies, and these were people that came to our homes, and we got to know. They're very good friends of mine to this day in the Caribbean islands. So it wasn't something which I felt, and it may be a regional thing. I just have no idea. But what I did agree with Tom Harrison and the ECB board was that we must all be a part of the solution to this, and we all need to re-examine ourselves and to become better at acknowledging the EDI principles.
Mike?
I think that several things. Sometimes it takes a shock to bring people home to reality, and whilst there is a very clear view that the game, and I really want to emphasise this, at the grassroots level, the recreational game and the support that thousands of volunteers, there's about 40,000 people unpaid that support the game, they don't see it in quite that category because they're all involved in playing with all sorts of different people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So when that comes out in the way it did, it triggers in some cases, some overreaction. In some cases, you've got to go back and say, hold on a minute, we're doing quite a lot of things very, very well. And what the ECB has been doing over a period of time, and Kamlesh alluded to this with the South Asian plan, we have been working quite hard to make the game not only seem to be more available, but actually more available. And I think what this has done, this has accelerated the process for a lot of people. But what it's also done, and the ECB have worked closely with us on this one, but sometimes when you're working together in a collaborative way, sometimes things miss. And in this case, it was very fast, and we had to come together and find a way forward. And in doing that, there were certain frictions, which, because we're all quite grown up, we're able to deal with it. But that doesn't mean
what
that...
What type of frictions?
Well, a statement would be made that, for instance, you must do this by April 2022. A 20% or a 30%, and you could say, well, hold on a minute, we're moving down a path which could get us there. We'd rather do it a little bit later when we've had a chance to make sure we've got the right people in place. As it happens, many of us have got 20% or 30% culturally diverse people within our management structures. But it's no good just saying you must do that within a 3 to 4 month period, because, again, These organisations, our organisations, for the most part, are voluntary organisations, so we have to rely on the goodwill of everyone to work together. And that's why it takes rather more time. I think the ECB's concept is absolutely right. How we get it to where it needs to get to is part of the engagement that the counties have to have. And I think the counties themselves have spent an enormous amount of time working very hard at this.
Lord Patel, clearly you were very much around just at the time when this was all being drawn up. How were you involved in this with the ECB?
I suppose I'm a little bit anxious in the sense that, look, there's never a silver bullet to sort this. And if I just take the EDI plan as a starter, and there's some of the comments as well, it's really helpful that a governing body puts a framework out that's fairly clear that you localise. And that's important, because I'll think if it's one framework that we all localise in very different ways because of different demographics and issues, at least there's something to measure. And it's really important because we've all talked about, we've known this for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You know, I was a part of the ECB when we produced the South Asian Action Plan. That's been there for 6 years. Why have the figures not changed? You know, the Inspiring Generations is all about a cricket, you know, is a game for me. You know, for boys and girls, for, you know, primary schools, you know, different diversity. Why hasn't it changed? I can give you an encyclopedia of the initiatives that Yorkshire have done in the community, working with Afghan refugees, to women and girls, to giving free school meals with free coaching. There are initiatives that everybody's done. It feels to me, and, you know, forgive me, people will probably won't agree with me, the add-ons, they feel like an afterthought. It's not cracked the major issue of why have we still got large numbers of kids at recreational level who are not coming through the system. There's something systematically, fundamentally wrong, and we haven't measured it.
If we focus on that, do you think this strategy will change that and see those young people come through the first class cricket? And how long do you think it'll take us to see that change?
We've just, in the last several weeks, worked on localising the ECB's action plan. And actually, at first sight, you think, oh, no, come on. But actually, when you work through it, I think if you localise it and you put the key performance indicators in and you measure it and we're held to account, I think all of us can move. And I'm fairly confident it's a plan that will work. But
how long will it take?
Some places it'll take years. Some places it'll take decades. You know, this is an ingrained problem. This is not just about South Asian communities. You know, it's absolutely about women and girls. It's about culture. It's about poor working class. You know, Darren Goff, who's just joined us as managing director, his abiding memory is, you know, when he first played his county game at Yorkshire, they put it in the newspaper, the rat catcher's son, because his dad was a rat catcher, and he turned up in the rat catcher's van. He said, you know, if it was me today, I wouldn't be able to play because I couldn't afford it. So I think there's lots of factors. There's socio-demographic factors, there's coaching factors, there's your own staff, do they reflect the population, there's governance factors. And I'm lucky, we've got a clean slate where we're putting all this together. But unless, you know, and I think this committee is right to sort of say, let's see this move every quarter, because if we don't see it move every quarter, and, you know, it might take a year before things start moving, but we'll be back here 10 years' time saying we've had lots and lots of initiatives and we're doing our best, but we're still, those kids are missing in the system still.
So can I ask, thank you, the other three, do you think this strategy is going to work, and how long do you think it's going to take? Very briefly.
I think it will work. I think Lord Patel is right that it's in for the long haul. It depends on the extent of resources which we as a county and beneath us the recreational game can invest, and that's a significant issue, I know. But the will is there. But there are all sorts of demographic problems. In Wales, for example, you know, our average earnings are lower. Those from a diverse background live in rented accommodation, that much more of the higher percentage of rented accommodation. There are big and significant issues. There's no point pretending that all these fine words and the actions which we'll take will bring a cure overnight.
Thank you.
I think it will work. I think it is working. We've got 3 people on contract out of the 22 that come from culturally diverse backgrounds. We've got a whole lot more. We've signed the agreement with Session Tendulkar and the Academy. I believe, and I really want to emphasise this, the counties have not been given credit for the work that's been done over a long period of time. Of
How long do you think it's going to take?
I think it's going to take us another, if we wanted to get to 30%, we can do that in a year, because we've got 3 on now. So I fully expect that to see our first 11, for instance, have 2 players of a cultural background, with 2 others there out of the 22 professionals. And I believe that lower down in the second 11 and in the academy, we will have the same. There's definitely a willingness, there's definitely a commitment, and there is now the willingness on the part of the outside world to say, OK, if you're serious, we'll support you, and we're seeing that.
The end, and then I'll bring you in. Do you think this is going to work, and how long do you think it's going to take?
I do believe that it'll work. I mean, I think I can't put a time frame on it, but we will use our best endeavours, and in some areas, I think we're already there and probably overachieving in some areas. You know, I think that we've identified what the issues are in our particular area, and we are addressing them. And we've accelerated that process.
Sorry, and you know, it's much easier for me than my colleagues here, because you know I've sort of inherited something that's blown up, but it's useful. You know, you take advantage of that. But you know, if you think in 8 weeks we've signed a partnership with, you know, which would have been unbelievable 8 weeks ago when Azim was making his, giving his evidence here about institutional racism against the Pakistani. We've signed a partnership deal with a Pakistani Super League team, the Lahore Qalandars, who are phenomenal in doing outreach. 500,000 kids in 2.5 years given the opportunity to become coaches. We've signed a deal with them. We've got an overseas Pakistani player coming to there. We've working with universities, colleges, to look at apprenticeships, looking at degree level sport accreditation. You know, we're working with local businesses. There's so much potential through this door of running an iconic sport venue where you can bring those other resources. With the health service, if we've got thousands of girls and women coming through our system, you know, we know cervical screening is a problem. Why can't we do it with them in partnership? The CCG will happily fund that. You know, we've got 22,000 spectators coming. This health outcomes we can deliver in that process. So I think it's really thinking out of the box. So in a sense, I've taken my cricket hat away and just thought, you know, I've got an iconic sporting venue. I've got access to hundreds of thousands of kids and people. How can we get together? Why can't we celebrate Eid in the ground? Why can't we celebrate Hanukkah in the ground? Why can't we celebrate all these things and bring people together? Close the alcohol stands for the day. And so this, you know, we've got that great opportunity, but on a large scale, in partnership with others. And I think this framework gives me the ability to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on something there, you said, Mr. O'Farrell, so counties aren't given the credit for their work as such. Now, we are aware, obviously, of some of the initiatives that you and other chairs have outlined, and I've seen them personally. And obviously, you mentioned the 1980s and the fact that there were many players of diverse backgrounds. However, most of those were overseas players. Roland Butcher, I think, was the main from Africa-Caribbean background.
Wayne Dowland and others, yes.
First player who was to play for England from Africa-Caribbean background. Yes. However, you know, we are struck, those committee, that figure that Lord Patel stated earlier, that the 35% of recreational cricketers from a South Asian background. Now, you operate in one of the most diverse cities in the world. How is it that you actually can just say, we're not getting the credit? You're still underperforming. And that's across the board. You're still not up to speed. So,
sorry.
Do you mind if we don't actually sort of give you credit? Would that be a...
We're not looking for credit, Chairman. We're actually trying to give the facts. We've got 57% of the players that we have under 17 come from culturally diverse backgrounds. As we move up the chain, particularly when we get to the academy, we then find that becomes more difficult. for several reasons. Part of it is education, part of which is the impact of we work with 3 other counties, Berkshire, Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire, who also feed in players at that level as well. It is now starting, and we also have the state versus private school sector bit to cover. So what we're trying to do is manage all that expectation. The other thing in the diversity bit is that the football and rugby world becomes much more attractive to the Afro-Caribbean community. And in terms of the South Asian community, there is a moment where we're finding that they do not want necessarily to commit the same time that is necessary to go to the next step, because they prefer, not always saying they do it, they sometimes prefer to go into other educational fields, and then cricket becomes secondary. And part of that is because it's a rather more time-consuming sport than some others. So we're finding that's difficult. Now that's changing with the 2020 sort of sport and the one-day games. But we are now finding that we're coming full circle, because the game is getting more exposed. There's much more choice, there's much more variation in the games, and therefore the South Asian community, young men and women, particularly the women, are finding this a much more attractive sport. So we are moving it forward. It's not as fast as we'd like it to, and we're trying to make as many opportunities as we can.
You were interviewed by Rob Bonnet on the Today programme this morning.
Yes.
In that interview you stated that there were 3 to 4 allegations of racism at the club that had come forward. But you described that as not particularly significant. Why did you describe it as not particularly significant?
Because they were not particularly significant in the context of the professional sport. They were significant in the context of the individuals concerned, and I'll use one example if I might. I went to see this man. He wrote, and so I went to see him at his club, and he suggested that we had broken the psychological barrier. I had broken the psychological barrier between him and his son, because he hadn't been selected for one of the Middlesex underage sides. Now that was a formal complaint, so we treat it in that kind of. I'm not dismissing the severity of the complaint. I'm saying that in relation to professional sport, that was a completely different issue. And of those 4, 2 are like that at the moment.
Charles Watling.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have to be very brief because I have to leave to go to the chamber. But there's a bit of confusion over the help that Roger Hutton asked for. He said he spoke to the ECB on the 4th of September, I believe, suggesting that the ECB handled the investigation. He felt that was the best way forward. In fact, he told us he felt that was the best way forward. However, the ECB disputed that and told us that Roger Hutton merely asked for someone from the ECB to join the already existing Yorkshire investigation. And I think this goes to you, Mike. Were you, as chairs, aware of Roger Hutton seeking that help from the ECB?
Forgive me, Charles, I'm not the chair of the ECB, I'm just the chair of Middlesex.
No, I absolutely realise that. As chairs of...
I'm sorry.
As you are chairs of various counties, were you aware?
Okay, Roger told me that had happened, and that was the first that I was aware that was the case. He said that this was the statement that was made here, that was his view. That was the first I knew of that.
And did you hear from the ECB side of that story?
No.
Not at all?
No, because I was only told about that very, very recently, so therefore I haven't gone back to the ECB.
All right, okay, so that's sort of going nowhere. So we know that Mahmouda Duke resigned as chair of Leicester, and this again is to you, soon after the announcement of the ECB strategy. Was that resignation related?
Let me be clear on this one. First, I respect Mahmouda immensely for her skill and her professionalism, and I think that she made it clear that she resigned on a matter of principle. That is a subject now for discussion between her and the ECB. She made it very clear that she felt that the way that the process was being conducted, particularly in relation to her, was not something with which she was at all comfortable. The ECB have received a notification of that, as have I. She sent me a copy, and that is now a matter between the ECB and Mahmouda.
But as far as you're aware, it's not related to the strategy that was launched?
Not as far as I'm aware of the strategy. I think it's something specifically apart from that.
Do you think it was to do with her relationship with the ECB or on how it engaged with the issue of racism within the sport?
In my dealings with working with Mahmood, I have found her very open and very direct, and she's very well respected amongst the chairs for her skills, but she's now, I think, shortly to be the new High Sheriff, if she's not already the new High Sheriff. And certainly as a professional, I found her very, very good at engaging. So my thoughts might be that her approach, which was very direct, was not working in the way that she wanted to. That might be the way forward. I don't know the answer to that question, except to say that from our perspective, let's talk about Middlesex's perspective and the dealings I've had with her on matters like that and race, she was very fair, very open and very clear.
It does seem a shame, does it not, though, that the only female chair of a first-class cricket county should resign under such circumstances.
I agree. I think it's a great shame that she's not there, as I think it's a great shame that some of the other people aren't there as well. She brought to the table strength, and it's a pity that strength isn't there at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I have to leave it at that.
Thank you, Charles. Steve Bryan.
Thanks very much. Good morning, Just. When Mr. Afiq accused a number of players of using racist language, one of the defences that was used was that the comments were banter. You remember that conversation. And Professor James Newman of Sheffield Hallam University, who's spoken to us, led a study into football coaches. He said sport as a whole is still too willing to accept behaviour that will be unacceptable in other professions. It's hardwired into sport that there is a tolerance of banter and that individuals are expected to put up with things that wouldn't be allowed elsewhere. And as we're increasingly finding out, it's very hard for a player to say you've actually offended me when their power-based perception is so low. And that would concur with some of the evidence that Mr. Afiq gave us. I just wonder, and very happy to start with you, Mr. Williams. Is banter a problem because there's a lack of professional boundaries in cricket clubs?
I can only speak for Glamorgan.
Yeah.
And the issue of dressing room culture, I made some inquiries about this before I came to this committee meeting. I explained that two of our players were British Asian players, and I know that they've been asked whether they felt the culture currently in the Glamorgan dressing room was one where they could take objection in any way to the conduct of their other players, and they said no. It may be in part that's because we have a full-time female physiotherapist who's also made a significant difference to the culture within the dressing room. Historically, I have no doubt that there would have been issues. I'm encouraged by the fact that as part of this plan, the ECB is going to address the dressing room culture. I don't think actually it's for individual counties to lead on that. I think we're entitled to look to the ECB to give us direction as to how that should be done. It should be undertaken independently. And you're absolutely right. The sort of language that we've heard of is totally unacceptable and should play no part within the dressing room, because the whole object of this exercise at every level is to ensure that everyone is welcome to participate and should feel comfortable in the environment.
Okay. Ms. Bransgrove, what do you think about banter in professional cricket clubs?
This is one that clearly has attracted the attention of all of our cricket managers. There's no doubt that it occurred. I actually had dinner with Desmond Haynes when I was in Barbados recently. We talked about all this, and he sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, you wouldn't believe what we used to call ourselves back in the day, or call each other back in the day. And it was seen as a part of the fun. There were some boundaries they wouldn't cross. The kids in our academies are taught not to use any language which is offensive, and that's been a byword of the academy for some time. I think we've moderated that now, or will be moderating it to language that could be offensive, and to try and ensure that we don't get into those circumstances. I know one very, very popular overseas player at our club who became club captain at one stage, and he joined the club before we took over, And we'd had a history of having overseas professional players from the Caribbean. We also had Cardigan Connor, who was also from Anguilla, a Caribbean background. And when all those players disappeared, he termed himself Token, and he used that nickname even when he was signing signatures. So there was a degree of humour in it which emanated from the players themselves. That we would obviously expect now is not acceptable. But in many respects, some of these nicknames and banter names were originated from the person who was the subject of it. Under those circumstances, it's difficult to call it offensive. But I do think that everybody in the dressing room now knows, professional cricketers now know, the managers now know that we just have to change that culture, and that nicknames have to be a contortion of surnames or something like that, which at least has some modicum of humour about it.
Thank you. Mr. O'Farrell, from Middlesex point of view, what do you think?
I think it's, for us, been a very interesting one because, of course, we have some old pros who see the banter as an integral part of the game. Some of those are still on the board. The newer players, both men and women, don't accept that. And our coaches and our new coaches, and we're very lucky that our previous MD of cricket, Angus Fraser, was a man of very high integrity, has changed and is forcing through that change. And it's interesting. It's not really necessary to force through it because people do not wish to use that language. And there's a very interesting example of a game recently where there was something very unpleasant said, and several people engaged with the individual on the field to stop it. So I see that as a seed change. It'll be enhanced by what the ECB is doing, but I think, to Gareth's point, I think it's very important that this is seen as a whole game approach, not just individual, that it's driven from the top and that we all buy into it, because I think that's the way forward.
And then just Mr. Patel, just to you, Lord Patel, sorry. How much effort do you as Yorkshire do you think clubs should put into developing young cricketers as ambassadors for the sport, as opposed to just being good at cricket, just being good at the game?
You've hit the nail on the head for me. I think it's really important right from the beginning. And this goes back to the culture piece. It's about the culture of the organisation. I've played cricket all throughout Yorkshire since I was a kid, and whether you call it banter or racism, for me, it's all unacceptable. I don't know how a streaker runs across the pitch, and then if you did that in public, you'd be on the sex, down the high street, you'd be on the sex offenders register. I can't understand why we forgive something because it's in a stadium. If you're using language like that, you shouldn't use it. It's as simple as that. But it is. It's from those young kids, and it's the professionals, and it's a small minority of spectators who bring disrepute to themselves and on the club. But we have to have a zero tolerance policy with those people, and then move forward. But it's going to take time. It's culture change. It's about being a good person. It's about saying, do you want to be treated like that? Do you want your sister to be called that? Do you want your brother to be called that? No, you don't, so don't do it to others.
Yeah. Same for coaches, yes?
Across the piece. Absolutely across the piece. Yeah. From your receptionists, your grounds people, right through to the customers who walk through the gates.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Damien Green.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, all. I'm struck. One of the points that's come out of this, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the problem we're discussing, sort of both the wider problem of racism, but specifically the problem of bringing through boys and girls from minority communities into the professional game, is a sort of subset of the problem of bringing anyone with sort of financial disadvantaged background through into the professional game, because it's so expensive. And in the depths of history, cricket used to have a game every year of gentlemen versus players, which is ludicrous these days, of amateurs versus professionals. It feels from what you're saying that we've only got the gentlemen now, and gentlewomen presumably, that we've lost, a huge part of the country that now no longer has access to the professional game. Is that? I think, Mr. Bransgrove, you made the point explicitly about some of your efforts to alleviate this. But am I right in that analysis of what you're saying?
Well, certainly in our area, sadly, that seems to be the case. That the disadvantaged people are intimidated, if you like, even if they do play cricket. They're intimidated if they go along to a cricket club and there are kids there with £200 cricket bats and all the designer pads and all this sort of thing, and they can't afford that kind of equipment. Now, what we're saying in our entire development pathway actually is that not being able to afford it will never be a reason for a person not being selected. We have to find a way of doing that where there is talent. But what we're now moving on to is not being able to afford it shouldn't preclude somebody from playing it in the first instance. And I know that the STARS programme, Wickets programme, that ECB runs, is a part of the process of us identifying people that we may be able to take into the State School Academy and give them a chance to develop and grow. We will need help. We won't be able to pay for all of this ourselves. Our charity actually is making certain contributions to this, or intending to make certain contributions to it. But it's a programme which I will be taking to the ECB at some stage, looking for some support to say, look, here is an opportunity. I've sent a short video piece to one or two people at ECB who've seen what we're doing and seen the way it's structured. And I think once we get this moving into other cities as well, I think it's something that the whole game could embrace. But my assumption has always been that a lot of people are already doing these things. A lot of things happen at the ground with counties, which we just get on with because of the ordinary course of our business. We've never been asked in the past, I guess, to say, well, what are you doing about this and what are you doing about that? What this committee's done is focused on an area where I think we all acknowledge we can do better, and we all intend to do so. But please don't think that there's nothing going on out there to encourage these young people from overseas backgrounds to participate in our sport, because there are a number of initiatives around the country.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that. I think that, again, because we're doing so much, we sort of take it for granted that it's known. I mean, in London, we'll arrange cricket for disabled groups, those that are in building that are in difficult accommodation. We will put street cricket. We will play in warehouses. We do an awful lot, and our professionals go out and do that with our coaches too. And that makes cricket available to so many people. I mean, there will be times at Lord's where and remember it's the MCC's ground, but there'll be times at Lord's where the bottom end will be full of young people playing cricket, not on the main square, but playing at the bottom end. And that goes on, I'm sure that goes on in many counties. And again, there's so much work being done at the local level by volunteers to bring people into the game. So I see this whole process here as a reinvigoration of what we need to do more of, and not just we, but a recognition that everybody has a part. Cricket is one of the few sports that you can get to the top without being 6'5", built of muscle. You can actually, Sachin Tendulkar is 5'2", 5'3", one of the greatest players in the world. So it's hand-eye coordination, and that's what cricket can do for those that are less fortunate, for those that are poor, for women, for everybody. And we have a part to play as a whole game. And I think this is a wake-up call.
The issue in Wales is, in a sense, particularly acute because state schools effectively play little or no cricket. And there are very few private schools. All the private schools do play cricket, which comes back in a sense to Mr. Brennan's point about how critical it is to engage with diverse communities and so on. There is fantastic work being done at ground level in relation to local schools and with the All-Stars and the Dynamos programme. We have to make that work. It's a Cricket Wales and Glamorgan joint initiative, and it is, in a sense, if we're talking of cricket and Glamorgan cricket as a business, it is, I think, for our future, business critical that we make it work.
One other completely different point, which for all four of you, is that the sort of process point about the ECB, that it is both the promoter of the game and the regulator of the game, and in principle that feels like a conflict of interest. Do you think that the game needs to address that and separate out those two functions? Shall I go? I'll go left to right, shall I?
I don't. It may be provocative to say so, but you know, I'm doing, put my lawyer's hat on. I've been a lawyer for very many years, and for much of my time I was involved with rugby. I think it's a common issue in all sports where you have a governing body which is both promoter and also a regulator. And I'm sure the ECB would be the first to say that in this particular instance they didn't get it right. But I don't think you should necessarily make the one instance an opportunity to make a completely savage revision to the current arrangements, because generally speaking, the regulator's job is to make sure that if a charge is brought against a club, against an organisation, against an individual, that charge is properly dealt with, and if there is a hearing, it's constituted before a properly independent tribunal. My experience of those tribunals in sport is that invariably they're conducted before quite often a retired High Court judge, a distinguished QC and so on, and to suggest that in some way their impartiality might be compromised because they are undertaking that inquiry under the auspices of a governing body would, I think, be grossly insulting to them. And in this particular case, the ECB does have an appeal procedure which I suspect would involve again yet another layer of distinguished lawyers and ex-sportsmen. So for my part, I don't think you should rush to make a conclusion. I understand that in other sports there is a movement towards an independent. I think the right course is for the ECB to conduct a thorough review of its own governance before making any hasty steps for separating, on the one hand, promotion and regulation on the other.
We'll be able to hear from them in a minute. Lord Patel, what do you think?
So, voting time. Just have to put on record that I spent 5.5 years as a member of the ECB board. Actually, when I started there, you know, I was part of the few people that instituted the governance reforms. And if you think back, you know, there was one person, a woman who was in charge of integrity and regulation, one person. We formed a whole team of some very eminent people that were brought in from outside in terms of anti-doping. And so, you know, mustn't forget the huge amount of regulatory work that's done. I've always referred to it as a governing body because that's what it is. You know, I've been a regulator, chair of 2 government regulators and a member of 3 others. I think you can do both. I think you can do both well. I think the ECB can do both well. I don't see that separation happening because you'd have, you know, unless you're going to make it a formal regulator and give it statutory powers and, you know, and then separate. I think there are huge problems with that. I think there's a benefit of it being a governing body that takes, you know, we've just talked about all day about children right through to that professional level. They've got that piece. That's what they need to be driving. There's an issue about, you know, how many counties they are, funding, all sorts of other things. But I think in terms of the direction of travel, you know, I think that the foundations are there. That may need tweaking a bit, but, you know, I'm very comfortable with it.
I'm going to be slightly different because I think that at this particular time, given what we've been through, I think it's time to reappraise the two things. There are other areas where you see a separation, and I think that before we rush to any judgment, we need to just ask ourselves if the game, because we're all part of the game, are we doing the right thing in the right way? And I would say that at the moment, it's not clear in my mind that the current structure is fit for purpose going forward for the long term. So I'd like to see us look very hard at this in the same way that we're going to look hard at the Constitution, because I think how we go forward will define whether those young people that we all want to stay in the game will still find it attractive. So I think that, for me, the jury's out on this one.
It's probably no secret that I've had my issues with the ECB from time to time, and this hearing is not about Hampshire and its circumstances, but what I have had is 22 years' experience of the ECB as a governing body. And indeed, I was one of the people who voted to change from the first-class forum to have a properly constructed board of directors to run the business. But what has become apparent to me throughout that period of time is that it is almost impossible to get a decision which is totally free from some bias. And the comment that you made earlier on about that I'd said that I know what prejudice is like, I might have made a comment like that, but nothing about being white or 65. I do know what prejudice is like. I do know what it's like to be overlooked for reasons which are completely outside of your control, and you feel isolated, alone, you can't sleep, it's on your mind all the time. My sympathy was with people who are prejudiced against. And I do believe that the dual role of the ECB, on the one hand as the promoter of the sport, and the group given the right to exploit our assets to the benefit of the stakeholders, is the same group who then regulate and I think / control, possibly more control than regulate, the group, using that very checkbook that is there to provide wealth for its stakeholders. The division between it for me is unclear. I have very little visibility about how the board work. I do not receive board minutes. I haven't received board minutes for years. I probably don't even know when the board meets. Now, I believe that there are some very well-intentioned people at ECB and some very high-quality people on the board of directors. And I believe that the process which has occurred during this committee's investigation has started a dialogue between the board of directors and its stakeholders, and it's vital that dialogue results in a structure which provides proper governance and safe decision making, whilst finding a mechanism to govern the game, not necessarily scrutinise and manage everybody that's participating in the game, but to govern the game on the other hand. I'm very hopeful that will be achieved.
It feels like we've got 2 votes for change and 2 votes for the status quo here, so we should have 5 witnesses, and then so we need to appoint a chair witness. Sorry, back to you, Chair.
Just on that point, Rod, if you're talking about it's a bit of a blunt instrument then, just basically the checkbook. That's what we saw eventually brought Yorkshire to heel was the international cricket. Shouldn't there be more sort of subtle, more sort of and also transparent means by which the ECB interacts with the counties?
Of course, and I mean there should be much more transparency in the ECB, but the way decisions are made don't appear to be like that. I should point out that international and test match travel cricket is vital to all of the, at the moment, 7 accredited test match grounds, but it's only one that's actually been, if you like, had it taken away right at the beginning. So I do believe that is only a symptom of decision making. I find it very difficult to believe that a board of independent people would look at a proposal to distribute 30 test matches to 7 grounds and see that one is excluded completely and not say, what's the reason for this? That doesn't seem right somehow. And that's never been explained to me. But that is a personal experience. There are other circumstances and other decisions where we've been bemused. The decision, for instance, to pull out of a commitment to go and play in Pakistan, which didn't seem to make any sense given what Pakistan had brought to England the year before during the height of the COVID situation. So understanding decisions, the connection between the board of directors. I haven't even met some members of the board. So it's very difficult for me as a stakeholder to assess how well our directors are performing for us.
Yeah. Brennan?
Mr. Bransgrove, just to clear that up, what you just said, I asked you earlier about some remarks which you said you denied that you said, and then you just in previous answers to Damien Green said I said something else about prejudice. Is it that you were drawing in the remarks you made a comparison between the prejudice that you feel that you've faced as chair of Hampshire Cricket Club and racial prejudice? Is that what you were saying, that those two things were analogous in some way?
What I was saying was that I have enormous empathy for people who suffer from prejudice because it gnaws at you all the time. When you cannot explain the reasons why somebody has a particular regard or lack of regard towards you, whatever the background is, Prejudice is a dreadful thing to suffer from, however it occurs. And my sympathy was with anybody who's suffered prejudice. We would never allow that to happen at any company of mine.
And were you in any way suggesting that the prejudice you'd suffered was greater than the prejudice that had been reported to this committee?
What I was suggesting is that I understand how people feel when they are prejudiced.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. That concludes our first panel. Gareth Williams, Lord Patel, Mike O'Farrell and Rod Bransgrove, thank you very much for your evidence today. We're going to take a short adjournment to set up our second panel. Order.
Thank you.
Proceeding is currently suspended. The 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 proceeding is currently suspended.
Order, order. This is the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and this is a hearing into racism in cricket. And this is our second panel today. We are joined in our second panel by Tom Harrison, the Chief Executive of the ECB, by O'Brien, the Chair of the ECB, Baroness Amos, Board Member of the ECB, and a late entry, Martin Darlow, ECB Deputy Chair and Cricket Non-Executive Director, who I understand has been at Yorkshire over the last month, I believe.
I've been there quite a lot, Chair.
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant. Well, we'll no doubt ask you about the, your experience there. First of all, we've been sent, and sorry, good morning anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We've seen your tackling discrimination in cricket, your 12-point plan. You've clearly raided the Getty images as part of putting it all together. All reads all very nice, and quite lots of jargon, lots of quite buzzwords if you like. But we were challenged, or you were challenged in the first panel by Lord Patel, in terms of, quite frankly, whether or not you're going to actually properly look at the numbers here, whether you're going to have proper targets, whether or not you're actually going to report these on a regular basis. It's all very good marketing, but where's the beef in what you're actually going to do?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So firstly, we welcome the opportunity of today to meet with you again and update you on our progress on the action plan that we launched in November last year. Can I once again just register my thanks to Azim Rafiq and his powerful testimony of the last session, and indeed to other whistleblowers who have come forward to provide evidence and to explain their experiences of cricket. Clearly, we've made some significant progress in the last few weeks, and we're here to explain that to you. Just before I do that, I'd just like to say that everything that has happened over the last 6 or 7 years in this game has been designed to make the game bigger, broader and better for everyone in it, to create a game for everyone. That has been the ambition behind Inspiring Generations, the plan that we launched in 2018, which came into being in 2020. It was the theme behind the South Asian Action Plan and indeed the Transform Women and Girls Pathway from 2019. So we have, what I'm trying to say here is that we are building on foundations where we're trying to tackle the biggest issues facing our game, and we're extremely grateful to this committee for giving us the impetus and I suppose an adrenaline shot into our plans to enable us to accelerate and put a sense of urgency into this huge issue of tackling racism and discrimination in our sport. To the matter at hand, the meat, as you called it, the beef. We've put the 12-point plan is backed by £25 million of additional resource and investment from the ECB. We have a burgeoning partnership with Kick It Out, which I need to thank the Chair for his idea to open that nascent relationship. We've matched some funding from our partners Sky in investigating and researching how Kick It Out can expand their operation into cricket, which will be the first such venture outside football. We are in the process of creating a new anti-discrimination unit within the ECB. That will be ready by the start of the international season this year, so end of May. We have launched a dressing room culture review under the leadership. I've asked Claire Connor to take that on. Claire will be well known to members of this committee. She is a former England captain, a highly decorated England cricketer, and indeed the current managing director of Women and Girls Cricket at the ECB, and also the serving MCC president. And she's ideally placed to lead that review into dressing room culture across the men's and women's game in this country at all levels. And indeed, sweeping governance reform, which is headlined, I guess, by the 30% gender balance across all boards at professional level across the ECB, professional and domestic level across ECB stakeholders, and matched with ethnic diversity levels which match the local demographics of the population in the areas of those respective stakeholders. In terms, those are some headlines, and I can go into a lot more detail. We obviously, you'll be concerned about scrutiny and how are we holding ourselves to account for this. The headline issues are going to be overseen by EY independently, who are creating effectively a dashboard which will be publicly available. We'll be publishing those quarterly updates and, of course, providing annual updates through the annual report on our progress.
Just on that point, so it's now quarterly, because the issue is 12 months, so you're going to do this
so
on a quarterly
we'll be
basis.
reporting to you on a quarterly basis,
right,
which will be information that comes from that. But over and beyond that, we've obviously got our own KPIs and milestones along the 5 different pillars of the
what are the KPIs?
So the KPIs would be things
just
like...
because people obviously, it's jargon again, but it's basically key performance indicators.
So basically, what we're trying to achieve by when. So, for example, we have recently concluded a game-wide census, an EDI census across the game, where we hope by the end of 2022 to have 90% of people who are interviewed through this panel, which is obviously, you heard about the scale of the game at volunteer level, over 40,000 volunteers, but also people throughout the game, domestic and professional, recreational and professional level, reporting back on whether they feel cricket is an inclusive and diverse sport. We have set a target of 90% for the end of this year. The levels at the moment for the recreational game are 80% for people reporting through that game-wide census. And indeed, through the pathway, professional pathway levels, it's lower and at 68%. So we've got a huge amount of work to do there. Another example of a key performance indicator would be on the talent pathways, where we want to get at least 30% of young boys and girls who are in those talent pathways from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And just to report on some progress, Chair, on that, in 2018, the number of ethnically diverse boys and girls, the stat refers to the boys game, was 11% going through the talent pathway. And as part of the South Asian Action Plan, we identified that as a key issue, and within those 3 years it has moved to 28% of young boys who are going through the talent pathway are from ethnically diverse backgrounds.
Now it's 28%, but your target's 30%, is that right?
Well, it's 30% throughout. So, and in terms of obviously taking that does not reflect the levels in the professional game. That is the talent pathway, of which a percentage, and we've identified through recent events.
So just be clear, you've not just set yourself a target you've already reached.
No, that's we're trying to continue to grow that.
2% difference between 28 and 30%.
Well, it's specifically the boys' game. We've obviously got work to do on the girls' game, and then take that 30% as a low minimum target across the game as an average, to make sure that we take that into the professional game as well through dressing rooms around the country.
Sorry, just to be really clear here, your target is 30%, is that correct?
By the end of this year, yes.
By the end of this year, okay.
Yes.
You're at 28% at the start of this year, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, clearly
okay.
So
why is it, you've got 17% increase in 3 years. That's 5.5% per year. You should really be at 35%, shouldn't you?
Well, what we aim to do is make sure that the talent that we have a flood of talent coming through, of which 30% is the low target. So if that number in some parts of the country is 50%, 60%.
This highlights an issue that we do have, is the fact that sort of game-wide reporting census and this very low target is that we're really concerned that frankly, as a committee, that the game itself is not going to effectively come up with what are really quite key performance indicators across the piece that can be clearly seen by the public. And that's the important thing here, the wider public and what they see the game doing. And that doesn't fill me with confidence that one of your key indicators is a 2% increase when you've already achieved 17% in the previous 3 years.
Well, look, I think what we're trying to ensure that 30% is across all parts of the country by the end of this year. We obviously have ambitions to take that number through the game, and let's take it through to England dressing rooms, for example. By the end of 2025, there is no reason why all England dressing rooms shouldn't have that kind of talent knocking on the door for international recognition in both the men's and women's game. So I think what it's telling us is that the strategies that we've employed as part of the South Asian Action Plan seem to be making a difference, but they are not making a difference nearly fast enough, or indeed in all parts of the country. So we need to work doubly hard to ensure that that is the case, and that we're reporting on an over-delivery against those KPIs and not an under-delivery.
Yes, yeah, but it's because you've set such a low target.
Well, we can look at that target, Chair.
In 1 year.
I think,
but our dispute would be whether or not actually these are, frankly, that they're targets that you're set up to achieve.
Well, there's certainly, I mean, that is probably the best statistic I can offer you in terms of how the progress that we've been making recently. I also want to mention the fact that, through the South Asian Action Plan, which has been mentioned a couple of times in this morning's proceedings, we have created 2,000 female South Asian activators of our sport. We're at 1,400 now. We have a target of 2,000. We've got some room to grow in that space. And the other bit of progress to report, and positive progress, is around urban cricket centres. You will have seen, and I would love to offer the invitation to the committee to come and see one of these urban cricket centres in action. We've got work happening in Bristol, we've got work happening in Bradford, and of course the one that is up and running is in Leighton. So more good news there, but look, we're not trying to pretend here, and I don't think anyone on the panel this morning was trying to suggest for a second that we are anywhere near where we need to be in any of these measures. We've got a huge bond of trust to create with the communities around this country that have felt let down, and we understand through the work of the ICEC, through the work of this panel, and indeed the research and work that's been undertaken through the creation of whistleblowing hotlines, etc., we understand the scale of the task that is ahead of us.
I'm keen to hear from Baroness Amos, because I know you're short of time with yourself. Tom just mentioned there about board diversity, and that being one of the key metrics that the ECB is looking at. What do you think? What needs to happen in order to improve that diversity? What cultural changes need to happen? Do you think in order to encourage greater diversity on boards?
Thank you. And can I just go back one step before picking up on that question? Because I really want to add to something that Tom said. I've been on the board since May, and as board members, what we're really interested in is transformation and change in the game. We know that that is the way that a game that we all love is going to survive. And you're right, absolutely right, to push us on the numbers, the targets, the metrics, and that we need to be challenging about those. But can I say to the committee, it's about more than that. It's about leadership, it's about representation, and we can look at targets in relation to that. It's about attitudes and behaviours, it's about culture change, it's about how we measure, it's about how we monitor. And in relation to board diversity, we have to be absolutely clear that we go out and we look for the kind of people that we want on the board. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of boards make is they employ headhunters, they expect people to come to them. You have to go out and you have to look for people, because if you don't have the role models on the board already, people aren't necessarily going to feel that this is something for them. So it has to be, a board has to make the extra effort, as it were. They managed to find me. I think it will be absolutely possible to find other people. There are lots of people with a passion for cricket in this country who care about cricket and want to be part of that transformation.
How do you feel that the only chair from an ethnic minority has just resigned, partly in frustration at what she believes to be effectively the paucity of action when it comes to the ECB over these issues?
I think it's a huge pity. I very much hope that Mahmouda will continue to stay connected with the game. She has a huge amount to offer. I have actually spoken to her. There are a number of issues that she and I have talked through, which I think it's important for me to bring to the attention of the board.
Okay, and what are those issues?
It was a confidential conversation, so I hope you will respect that.
Yeah, but clearly she feels as if the ECB is not up to, or has not been at the races as far as this issue is concerned, and that's the reason why she's walked.
There were a number of issues that she raised with me, which are matters that I think we have to address, which I will bring to the attention of the board.
Do you think that it's rather disturbing that, at a time when we're talking about extra diversity in the board, that, as I say, the one person who is a chair from an ethnic minority who decides to leave as a result of inaction in this area, that's a hammer blow to the ambitions of the ECB?
I think it's a huge pity that she has resigned.
She's right to.
I hope I can't speak for another person. There have been lots of circumstances in which...
Do you sympathise with her then? Do you sympathise with her frustrations at the ECB?
Look, one of the reasons, in my view, that she asked to speak to me is because I think she hoped that I would understand some of the issues that she wanted to put on the table. And I see part of my responsibility as bringing those issues to the attention of the rest of the board. She has given me permission to do that. She has not given me permission to talk about those issues in this committee.
Do you think she was legitimate in feeling that she was being used as in tokenism when it came to endorsing the ECB's response to the racism inquiry?
Yeah, you're going to try to push me to say things that I've already said to you.
Well, that's what she's told us.
Well, that's fine that she has told you that. She has not given me permission to talk about our conversation in this committee. I don't feel that I can do that.
Mr. Darlow, you've been at Yorkshire, so Red Adair, effectively, I suppose, would be in the ECB parlance, showing my age yet again. What is it that needs to happen, do you think? What do you think they've done that would allow them in order to get international cricket back? And what do you think needs to happen in the next 6 months in order for what they've done to sort of really root it down, to bed it down?
Well, I think the decision was made way before that, first of all. And I've spent a lot of time in Yorkshire with Camlish and his team. I have to say, the team on this have completed a phenomenal amount of work in such a short time frame. The scale of their ambition is not necessarily matched by the resource they have available, but nevertheless, Camlish is working all hours to try, with his team, to get to where he wants to be. The timeline for the decision on international cricket return is, I was up there on Saturday and addressed a very feisty Yorkshire Members Forum on Saturday.
Is there any other type of Yorkshire?
Well, it's difficult as a southerner to go to Yorkshire on a Saturday morning and speak to 380 Yorkshiremen where you've removed international cricket, isn't it? It was a tough gig, but it went really, really well. I had some great feedback in terms of honesty and my forthrightness, which is ironic given I was in Yorkshire. And Camlish appreciated that without a doubt. But that was to talk about the need for change and to talk to the members. So the timeline was, I was there on Saturday. On this Thursday, I'm leading an ECB team of service experts to review the 10 points that we've asked them to comply with. I think it's been shared with the committee. And then a report's going to be supplied to me and the ECB for us to consider with a presentation next Tuesday to the board on progress by a Yorkshire contingent. And then the big day really is the extraordinary general meeting with the vote by Yorkshire on the rule changes.
Okay.
And so once we're through that will be the 2nd of February. I anticipate the board will be making a decision or will be considering their options soon after that.
So the removal, effectively, of some of the powers of the Graves Trust is absolutely germane to the return of international cricket at Yorkshire. Is that fair to say?
I think a review by the Good Governance Institute, which I think Camlish referred to earlier, identified there were some things that needed to happen to the rules to change so that they could comply with the county partnership agreement requirements and just good governance for Yorkshire.
Yes.
And I understand that they are being removed.
Yeah. No, that's right. But my question is whether or not it's a prerequisite in your mind for the return of international cricket to Yorkshire that the Graves Trust has its powers curtailed.
They, I understand, have accepted the need to remove those powers, so it may be a hypothetical question. My view is that it would be a much better run organisation if they didn't have the vetoes in place.
I'm not sure you've entirely answered the question there. No, obviously, I've spent the last couple of weeks not answering questions, I have to say, over other matters. But it does seem to me that effectively there is the Yorkshire members have a choice here. They either vote, if they choose not to vote for the changes that are put ahead, including the governance changes, including the changes for over the role of the Graves Trust, if they choose not to vote for that, is there no, effectively, is international cricket not going to return this year?
It was a question that was asked last Saturday actually by a Yorkshire member, and my response to that was that you are not voting for the return of international cricket. You're voting for the future of Yorkshire Cricket Club, and it's the right thing to do. That was the answer I gave.
Okay.
And that's the answer I'm giving you today.
And so they're not connected. So if they don't vote for it, it doesn't make any difference to whether or not international cricket returns.
I refer to my earlier answer.
Be a politician.
Yeah, exactly. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can I just go back to Mahmouda Duke and what the Chair was asking for, but perhaps to Mr. Harrison, because I know that Baroness Amos has had a private conversation. But did Mahmouda Duke contact the ECB in relation to her resignation? I mean, what light can you shed on what she said about why she resigned?
Well, look, firstly, I can say that I share the board's view that it's a real shame, a absolute pity that Mahmouda is not going to be part of the immediate future anyway. I had a discussion with Mahmouda in October last year, and my discussion with her was about whether she would be a candidate to be chair of the ECB, because I felt that she has got all the right kind of experience and wherewithal to put her name forward. So from a personal perspective, I'm very saddened that she's not part of the chair's group at the moment. And again, look, with respect to what she has submitted, I refer to Baroness Amos's comments about it being a confidential matter, which Baroness Amos will lead on behalf of the board.
Did she feel intimidated, coerced and manoeuvred by the ECB and traumatised by the experience of being on the ECB?
I can't answer that question, Mr. Brennan. Again, it's a matter for the board to consider on the basis of what she has submitted.
Did she feel there was talk of partnership, but it was total lip service in her dealings with the ECB?
Well, again, I can refer to the fact that it's a matter for the board to consider, but clearly we take partnership as at the heart of everything that we do with our stakeholders, with our commercial partners. It's our game is one big partnership. We have to do things in partnership for things to work, and the 12-point action plan is a great example of how the whole game has come together. The 18 first-class counties, the recreational game, the 21 county boards, the National Counties Cricket Association, the MCC and the PCA, and all the women's cricket hosts, professional women's cricket hosts, have come together to commit to a 12-point action plan to deliver lasting change across the game.
Did she feel like she was a token woman of colour being rolled out as a poster girl for the ECB?
Mr. Brennan, I'm going to refer to Baroness Amos's answer about confidentiality with respect to something that Baroness Amos will lead on behalf of the board.
Okay. How would you categorise your relationship with the chairs of the county clubs?
I've had excellent relationships with the vast majority of county chairs over the course of my... are you talking about ECB or myself in particular?
Both.
Okay, well, we obviously, nothing happens without partnership with our county chairs. We're a big sport, and we rely very heavily on our professional environment and our domestic recreational environment to enable strategy to take place. So they are effectively the delivery arm of everything that we put together. So our partnership is absolutely key.
Can I just ask a question, Mr. O'Brien? Obviously something went horribly wrong with the relationship between the ECB and Mahmouda Duke, and whether or not what I've put to Mr. Harrison, is what she communicated to the board. I accept the fact that you're not going to confirm or deny that was her reasoning for leaving, but something went horribly wrong. Do you have any insight into how that relationship went so wrong, Mr. O'Brien?
I don't think I can say any... Excuse me, I lost my voice. I don't think I can say anything more than already said.
I'm not asking you to say what she said, but from your point of view, well, can I put the question another way? Is there anything in your dealings with her that you would regret and would have done differently if you were faced with the same situation again?
I clearly regret that she resigned.
Yeah, I wasn't asking you about that, though. I was asking you about your dealings with her. Is there anything in your own personal dealings with her that you regret that might have actually triggered that resignation or been part of the reasoning for that resignation?
I don't believe so. There were a number of robust conversations that took place at the time, and I think that the real reason was perhaps Maria's view about the regulation of the ECB, where she didn't think we were going far enough and quickly enough.
Was she unhappy in any way with any of your personal dealings with her and the way that you handled her concerns?
She may have been, but
in what way?
Look, I think we're now beginning to get into the confidential area, which Baroness Amos will look into this, along with 2 other independent members of the board, and we will communicate our response back to Bermuda in due course. I'd like to say again, we very much regret that Bermuda resigned. She was a force for good. I very much hope she will come back into cricket at some stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. In this investigation that's going on into this resignation, Baroness, you're involved in this investigation, are you? Internal one?
I wouldn't describe it as an investigation. I had a confidential conversation. On the back of that conversation, I was asked to raise certain matters with the board. Those have been communicated. Those were communicated, and it was agreed yesterday between myself and Bermuda that this could be communicated to the board. As a result of that, our senior independent director has tasked 3 of us, including herself, to look into the matters raised.
So 3 directors are going to look into the matters raised from what Bermuda talked to you about confidentially, right? Yes. Okay. And the outside oversight of this is an independent director? Who is that?
Brenda Trenoden. She's the senior independent director on the board.
Right. Okay. Is there any plans to Mr. Harrison to bring anyone else in order to? Because the concern here is that effectively it's yourselves looking at yourselves.
Well, I'll refer to.
Can I,
please?
If I may, can I repeat again? I had a conversation at her request with Ms. Duke. On the back of that, she has communicated some issues which I consider it's important that the board look at. I asked her specifically if I could share her concerns with the board. She agreed that yesterday, and on the back of that, we will look at those matters. I think it's very, very important for us as a board to reflect on them.
Yeah, that's fine, but is it an investigation?
There has been there is nothing formal that has been asked to put to the board. So that's why I say there is no
investigation. A panel of 3 people have been formed in order to look at this particular note. So I'm using your phraseology and saying, look at it. Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to address these questions to you, as the book stops with you. Is this an investigation? Are you investigating her departure? Yes or no?
No.
Right. Okay. So just looking at is not.
It's not a formal investigation, Chair. I think as Baroness Amos has clearly explained.
It doesn't seem to be anything really, apart from just the phraseology is look at. So basically communicate, have a conversation, and then look at.
Well, Chair, can I pick you up on that? I was.
I'm really sorry about this. Sorry, no, excuse me, order. No,
because I think the context is important.
Baroness Amos. The reason why I'm taking that particular approach, Your Chair, is because, we have been in this investigation now on several sessions, and we found, frankly, that often within cricket, there is just the aspect in which people just mark their own homework all the time. And this, to me, and this committee, looks like it's happening again in that respect. So I don't know whether or not this is looking at is an investigation. I've been told it isn't an investigation. So my questions to the Chief Executive is whether or not you think this should be an investigation now that this has been brought out into the public domain.
Well, I think that's a matter for the board to decide, Chair, with respect, and that's the conversation that we have very recently instigated and been given permission to share with the board, and Baroness Amos will lead that discussion.
Leading a discussion, okay. Well, what we would like to see as a committee, please, is some transparency of this in the public domain. So what we want to see is who is actually taking part in this discussion, what times or dates that they actually occur, and please a précis under confidentiality, basically what is actually being discussed. We want to be certain that these matters are going to be looked over properly, rather than just yet another behind closed doors, seemingly not really an investigation, basically a sort of a conversation and nothing more than that. We need to see absolute transparency in this respect, Mr. Harrison.
Understood.
Thank you.
Chair,
Damien Green.
may I just add?
Yes, of course.
I really think it is not fair to categorise it in that way. And the reason that I say that is because if something has been brought to me, marked private and confidential, on the back of a discussion, to characterise it as a lack of transparency, I consider to be unfair. It is absolutely open for the committee to speak to Ms. Duke about her concerns and to put those on the record. But I do think that it is not fair to characterise what has happened with respect to her interaction with me as a lack of transparency, when she has been very clear that it is marked private and confidential.
We will be transparent about it then, won't we, when we'll get all the information from Mr. Harrison and the board about what is actually going on and the steps that you are taking, and then no one can say any lack of transparency. Damien Green.
Thank you. Can I sort of widen this out to a more general point about regulatory process and structures, which I can illustrate best by literally quoting from the last time the ECB came to the committee. This is an exchange starting with my questions. Who holds the ECB to account? Answer, the Independent Regulatory Committee. My question, who appoints the Independent Regulatory Committee? Answer, the ECB. This is clearly a circular arrangement which, and you'll have seen the exchanges earlier on. I think you've got a 2-2 draw from the county chairs, basically. But nevertheless, do you feel that there is something inherently unsatisfactory in an arrangement where a body appoints an independent regulatory committee that it can presumably then unappoint, and the independent regulatory committee is what holds it to account? I mean, that doesn't feel very satisfactory.
I think it is the model of self-regulation that is employed by many sports bodies in this country. Self-regulation is one form of regulation where we try to create the independence required within our own structures, admittedly within our own structures, to enable proper decision making and proper integrity of process to be the principles of how things are managed. And actually, with the vast majority of cases, our regulatory framework is absolutely sufficient for what we need, predominantly in the discipline space. I think that the debate we are now going to have as a game will be exactly that, which is how do in what circumstances does that regulatory framework need to be tightened up? Does the independence between the ECB and the ECB integrity team and the regulatory committee need to be clarified for people to enable that self-regulation model to continue? That's the debate that the game needs to have. But clearly there are other options.
You wanted to come in.
I was going to say that we will certainly be looking at this as part of our governance review. And it may well be that in order to deal with the perception that the chair of the disciplinary committee has been appointed by the ECB, we might look to a third party, Sports England perhaps, to verify that appointment. I don't think anybody's ever suggested that these members of the disciplinary committee have ever been but very, very tough and independent. But if we need to endorse that through some third party, we will certainly look at that as part of the governance review.
I mean, you heard the evidence just before you, particularly from Mr. Bransgrove, where the argument is whether the fact that as part of promoting the game, the ECB hands out large sums of money, at the same time it has the regulatory powers as well, and that therefore effectively it can use the distribution of money, or in this case the awarding of international games, as a way of in principle, ensuring that people stay in line. How do you separate the promotional and regulatory roles of the body in practice now?
Well, there are certain matters where the board will make decisions around, for example, the allocation of matches. And it's linked to the Yorkshire case, because in this case, it is the ECB board taking decisions around imposing sanctions or imposing criteria on which sanctions need to be considered on the allocation of matches. And that is probably the key criteria. And when it comes to the award of international matches, that is done by an independent panel as well, which is set up by the ECB board, which is called the HVP, the Hosts Venue Panel. And that will make decisions across a whole raft of criteria around where matches are going to be played. Those criteria include meeting certain EDI standards, as well as safety, as well as capacity, as well as a raft of other matters that need to be considered when we're allocating international cricket matches across a period of time.
So are any of the same people involved in that decision-making process that would be involved in regulatory decisions as well?
No. So that would be some independent members of events expertise, for example, and that's headed by our senior independent director. The group, the HVP that I'm talking about, is headed up by our senior independent director. The regulatory function is quite separate and would not have any involvement in that decision.
And is it separate in any kind of permanent institutional way, or is it just separate because you've decided to keep it separate, or it happens that different people have got different expertise?
Well, I think in terms of the regulatory committee overlapping with the board, I think that is something that is very deliberately very separate and very independent.
Thank you. Brian.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon. Welcome back, and hello to some. In 2018, which seems like a long time ago in current parlance, the ECB launched its South Asian Action Plan, Tom, describing the improved engagement that you want with the South Asian communities. It's part of your core ambition, isn't it, to grow the game and make cricket a game for everyone, quote unquote. I just wondered whether you could update the committee on the status of the South Asian Action Plan, and do you think your current strategy will have a greater impact than the action plan? Just give us a status update on that, please.
Yeah, so there were a raft of recommendations, 11 recommendations made through the South Asian Action Plan. I've already updated the committee as to some of that. The urban cricket centres, the female activators, and indeed the talent pathway and the movement in the talent pathway are three areas where we've seen some really positive movement. To answer your question, Mr. Bryan, around whether I think that a lot of what the EDI action plan, the 12-point plan that we announced in November, is going to do is it's going to inject some proper pace and energy and urgency into a lot of the work that the South Asian Action Plan actually started. So I think the South Asian Action Plan has been successful in parts. We need to accelerate that and go further, much faster than we've been able to. And I'm grateful to the committee's work and frankly holding us to account on this as a game, so that we can take that pressure to the market and to our stakeholders and to the wider cricket community and really make a difference to.
What does that acceleration look like? I mean, I guess what I'm asking then is how are you going to maintain the momentum, keeping this as a priority for the county boards?
Well, I think it's a raft of different things, whether it's about removing talent, removing barriers in the talent pathway, whether it's about listening, educating, the education process that we've now got going through the professional and recreational game is going to be very different this year to the way it's been in other years. Creating the welcoming environments for fans and spectators, building on the progress that we've made in 2021, which the committee may not be aware, but we had some hugely positive and successful data coming out of that year with respect to, for example, the number of people buying tickets for domestic cricket from ethnically diverse backgrounds. The 100 was the kind of best example of that, with 12.5% of ticket buyers being from ethnically diverse backgrounds. We're aiming to push that to 15% this year, and then to 20, and then to 30, and then beyond that over the coming years. The women and girls game, which has seen an unbelievable growth statistics over many years. We obviously took that to a new level last year in terms of 250,000 people coming and watching domestic women's competition last year, which was fantastic. Taking the game back to free-to-air television, over 100,000 young people joining All Stars and Dynamos cricket, over 500,000 people buying tickets for the 100 last year in its first year. Huge support for the Blast once we were able to get crowds back in to the ground. Massive streaming data for 4-day championship cricket in April and May, where we had the attention of the nation in this country on cricket in this country while the IPL is on. So it's a really good opportunity for us to focus on all the fantastic things that Red Ball Cricket is delivering for us across the season. So there are just a raft of different... We haven't been able to talk positively about a lot of that stuff, a lot of that information, obviously for obvious reasons in recent months, but we do believe there is a huge amount for us to build on and a huge amount of good work going on in this space on EDI. I'm the first to accept we are absolutely nowhere near where we need to be, and we have an awful long way to travel.
There's lots of good public affairs stuff in there, but you said removing barriers, listening, welcoming environment, and they're good pillars, they're good buzzwords. And I too can read a brief, but just unpack removing barriers for me. What are removing barriers? I mean, does that come into the financial support targeted young South Asian players, of bursaries to young players on the talent pathway? Is that what you're talking about?
Look, I think it's more complex than that, Mr. Bryan. And I think
tell me then. Tell me what.
I will do. Yeah,
Can I just say, Mr. Bryan, there's just a point of clarification earlier from something Mr. Bransgrove, which is relevant to this point as well, which Mr. Bransgrove referred to the Wickets programme, Wickets with a Z on the end, run by the ECB. It's not run by the ECB, it's run by Lord's Taverners, and we do fund Lord's Taverners. So in terms of removing the barriers, we have our charity partners, doing a great deal of work in the community to remove barriers. We've got the Lord Taverners Wickets programme, the Chance to Shine Street programme, we've got Capital Kids Cricket across London, we've got the ACE programme, and there are many others who are working alongside us to remove these barriers for access to cricket that then can lead onto a talent pathway and access to the game. I just wanted a point of clarification and also to update you on what we're doing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So look, I think once you've... It's all very well having data sets and measures to which we hold ourselves accountable, but as Baroness Amos said earlier this afternoon, this is about a mindset shift as well. It's about an understanding of the challenges that ethnically diverse communities face, whether that is about cost, and I know that's something that will be and has been mentioned already today. The provision of kit, the provision of opportunities, hardship allowances, which is what we have, and hardship funds across every county and county board in this country to enable young people who are struggling to meet the costs of cricket where that is an issue, helping make sure that is not an issue. We need to take that a lot further based on the feedback that we're seeing and the information we've got coming back to us. We have got county education officers that have been put in to support the talent pathway. Each county's now got those, and we've got athleticism and nutritional advice going into talent pathways to enable particularly South Asian families to understand the challenges, for us to understand the challenges that are facing young boys and girls from ethnically diverse backgrounds. It's a complex challenge, but it's one that has been highlighted by Azim's testimony and others as well, but one that we need to get to the bottom of if these young people are going to come through, as we want them to, into the talent pathways, into professional cricket, and then into international dressing rooms going forward.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of final questions. Mr. Harrison, this actual question probably applied to politics as well as cricket, actually, particularly given recent events. Do you think that players and coaching staff should conduct themselves according to the standards most of us would expect in a working environment? And how do you influence it?
Of course I do. And I think our project around dressing room culture, Chair, is a case in point on this. It's why I've asked Claire to lead this work. But I will say that I think we're building on some real positives here as well as some of the issues that we've seen very publicly highlighted through recent months. I can tell you that the England dressing room take this matter incredibly seriously and have talked about it as a group. I think that we are able to highlight best practice in some cases in the past where diversity has been a huge asset to dressing rooms, and I'll take the World Cup winning 2019 team as an example of the very best of diversity bringing through success, mutual understanding, people being able to be their authentic selves within dressing room environments, whilst preserving that sanctity that anyone who has played cricket at any level, and indeed other sports as well, understand that there is some there needs to be a sanctity around a dressing room environment, but it needs to be consistent with modern workplaces and the standards of behaviour that we expect through those.
We heard from Mr. Bransgrove that he'd not seen any ECB notes for years, was his exact, no board notes, no board minutes for years. Is this indicative, and we sort of split it 2-2 in terms of whether or not there should be reform at the ECB. Is part of the whole problem here that there is an antagonistic relationship between the ECB and the counties, and that makes it much more difficult for you to affect change, apart from situations such as we found at Yorkshire, where there was a key moment in time and when you could sort of effectively put your finger on their financial pulse, yeah, and bring about at least a radical shift in direction. Is this something that you really do need to address as a collective, your relationship with the counties? Because for I'll be honest with you, I can't speak for everyone the committee, I haven't actually discussed it, but it does look terribly frayed to me.
I think it is a complex relationship because of the way in which the ECB is constituted. We are effectively a product of our stakeholders, and there are certain very protected areas of the game where we are effectively the powers that, or the control, I'll use that word rather than powers, the control that the ECB has it matches the control that the game wants us to have, and so there are always areas of conflict, and look, we have a hugely changing environment. The world of cricket is changing around us. The role of white ball cricket, opportunities for players to generate a living all over the world, player power, player influence, the control of ICC events, the strength of IPL. There are huge tectonic plates shifting around world cricket that we need to manage within. And we're doing so actually very successfully in lots and lots of ways. But the impact is being felt, I think, at the level of our relationship with our county stakeholders. We need to continue to communicate and help share the challenge that we have. And I think this 12-point action plan, actually, Chair, if you'll forgive me, is a really good example of how we have come together. And I accept it's not, it is not.
You only had one resignation in coming together, to be honest about it.
Well, it's a very...
It's not an example, not really a particularly great example to use of a relationship that's working smoothly in that regard. But I take your point in that regard. I know, Barry, you want to come in, because I do think this is very much a really important matter, which really gets to the heart of it, basically, that relationship and the feeling of antagonism that's there, and whether or not that means that you can really affect change.
Excuse me, my voice is not good this morning, but I think that the relationship with the first-class counties is good, despite the fact that we do have some discussions with them, based upon the fact that they're under enormous strain. The impact of COVID financially on a number of the counties has been very significant, and so that's where discussions like test match allocation become very, very important. And the other thing that we must recognise is we represent the whole game. I mean, the recreational game, if it was here this morning, would tell you that they have a very, very good relationship with the ECB, and the women's game, the disability game. So we can't necessarily pander to the first-class counties the whole time, and they have to recognise that they will not get everything that they wish. Now, in terms of the governance review, we will have a very open and honest conversation with them about how they can maybe organise their voice in a more structured way. The professional game group could become a professional game board. We can have a chair. The chairs originally declined to sit on the professional game group. They're now saying that they regret that, and if there's a space for them on that would be very, very good indeed. So,
did you say they refused to serve on?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
They voted not to put chairs onto the professional game group,
right?
Which we were very surprised about.
What was the reason?
They felt it was an operational job for the chief executives of each of those counties, actually,
right.
and there was
a very, very good relationship with those chief executives.
Absolutely.
So it's not a lack of willing, but more sort of no.
And if I can just add, from a board perspective, I consider my relationship with every first-class county chair and chief exec as very, very good, and in some cases excellent. But you've heard this morning that the first-class counties can't necessarily agree themselves where they want to go, and sometimes there are issues of conflict that we have to deal with.
Yes.
But I feel overall, I don't want you to get the impression it's them and us. It's definitely not that. We work together very closely on many, many issues, but there are some decisions where we cannot agree, or they cannot agree, and then we cannot agree. But it's an excellent working relationship, I have to say.
Okay. I just one last thing before anyone goes. Mr. Harrison, you've got one final thing to say, and then we'll
yes, look, I just also wanted to mention that, we've just come through 2 years of pandemic, where the game has come together in the most constructive way to navigate through the enormous challenges that we've faced at domestic and international level. So I think it's whilst we always have our issues, there is a huge amount of partnership involved in how we operate.
Thank you very much. Tom Harrison, Baroness Amos had to leave us at 12:30, Barry O'Brien and Martin Darlow. That concludes our session today. Order.
Thank you very much.